All right, let's talk about the 2026 budget for the town of Whitchurch, Stouffville. And right off the bat, just so we're all on the same page, it's pronounced Stouffville. In this explainer, we're going to dig into how your tax dollars are being put to work to shape this really fast-growing community. So you pay property taxes, right? We all do. But have you ever really stopped to think about where that money goes? I mean, really goes. That's the big question we're diving into today. Okay, here's a quick look at our game plan. We're going to start with the big picture, then jump into the new construction, the services that affect your daily life, how you actually had a voice in all this, and what's coming up down the road.
All right, first up, the big picture. To really get what's happening with this budget, you have to understand one thing, and it's a big one: growth. Stouffville is booming, and this whole financial plan is basically a roadmap for managing that expansion.
So take this number, 57,484. That's the estimated population for Stouffville as of July 2025. You know, it's a pretty healthy number for a vibrant town. But, and this is the important part, that number is not standing still for a second.
And then, bam! Look at this. The projection for 2051, over 103,000. We're talking about the town nearly doubling in size. That's not just a little bump. That's a huge transformation that changes, well, pretty much everything. And you have to plan for that.
So let's follow the money. For every single dollar you pay in property taxes, where does it end up? Well, check this out. 32 cents, almost a third of it, goes straight to fire response. Then you've got 14 cents for roads, 13 for parks and trails. You add those three up, and that's almost 60 cents of every dollar right there. It really tells you what the town is focused on. Okay, so how do you pay for all that and manage all that growth we just talked about? Well, here's the number you've probably heard about, a proposed 3.5% tax levy increase for 2026. The idea here is that this increase is needed to keep services running smoothly and even improve them while the town keeps expanding. All right, let's move on to the really visible stuff, building our town. We're talking about the actual bricks and mortar, or, asphalt and concrete projects that your tax dollars are making happen. And here are some of the heavy hitters for 2026. You've got the Main Street reconstruction, which is a huge deal for revitalizing downtown. They're also finally closing that gap in the Stouffville Rouge Trail, which is awesome for anyone who loves getting outdoors. Plus, a new park, the annual road repairs. All of these are about making life better right now, while also getting ready for all the new neighbors. But a town is more than just roads and buildings, right? It's about your quality of life. So let's look at the services that affect you day in and day out. And this chart really breaks it down nicely. 16% of the budget goes to keeping the town safe. That includes things like hiring 4 new firefighters. Then you've got another big chunk, about 20% combined, going into making Stouffville an engaging and healthy town. That's the money for the library, the theater, parks, trails, all that good stuff. Okay, this next part is really important. A budget like this doesn't just appear out of thin air. Or at least it shouldn't. It's about your voice. For the first time, the town did a huge survey to hear directly from residents, to make sure the plan reflects what people actually want. And what did you say was most important? Take a look. The top priorities were infrastructure and fire and emergency services. Sound familiar? It should, because that lines up exactly with the big spending areas we just talked about. It shows that feedback was actually listened to.
And this wasn't just a casual thing. It's built right into the official budget process. You can see it right there. Step 2 is engage. That's where your feedback comes in and helps shape the decisions that the town's leadership team and the mayor make.
And Mayor Ian Lovett doubled down on this idea of teamwork. He made a point of saying that even with the province giving him what are called strong mayor powers, which give him more direct control over the budget, he's still committed to working closely with council. It's all about collaboration. Okay, so let's zoom out. We've talked about 2026, but what about the road ahead? Because a really smart budget isn't just about the here and now, it's about setting the town up for the future. Before we get to the next couple of numbers, we need to quickly talk about something called an asset management plan. It sounds complicated, but it's not. Basically, think of it like a home inspection for the entire town. It's a list of everything the town owns, roads, buildings, parks, and a plan for how much it's going to cost to repair and replace all that stuff over time. And that plan, well, it uncovered a pretty startling number, $8.3 million. That's the gap. every single year between what the town should be spending to keep everything it already owns in good shape and what it's actually spending. We're talking about a gap that, if you don't fill it, leads to things slowly falling apart. Now, if that wasn't enough, let's look 10 years down the line. The long-term plan has identified projects worth $226 million that are needed but are currently unfunded. These aren't nice-to-haves. These are things the town knows it's going to need to handle all that growth we talked about. But right now, the money just isn't there. And really, this brings us to the heart of the matter. It's this constant balancing act every town faces. On one hand, you've got to spend money to maintain what you have right now. On the other, you have to invest in brand new things for the future. It's a tug of war between today's needs and tomorrow's growth.
So that really is the million-dollar question, or in this case, the multi-million-dollar question. How does a community like Stouffville get that balance right? How do you take care of today without mortgaging tomorrow? There are no easy answers, but it's the challenge that defines this budget and every single one that comes after it.
Look, if you want to get into the nitty-gritty of all this, the full 2026 budget book is up on the town's website. It's all there for you to read. Definitely worth a look if you're curious. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is where we take those really complex documents, think dense municipal budgets, policy papers, stacks of research, and we boil them down for you.
Yeah, we pull out the essential insights, the stuff you really need to know, those surprising facts, maybe an aha moment or two.
And we do it without drowning you in jargon. We want this to be clear, accessible.
Exactly. Our goal is always to give you that strategic shortcut, you know. We peel back the layers on the decisions, the big financial commitments that are shaping communities.
Especially communities facing rapid change.
Absolutely. Which brings us to today's topic.
Right. Today we are tackling a big one. The 2026 operating and capital budgets for the town of Whitchurch, Stouffville.
A really interesting case study in managing growth pressures.
It really is. But first things first, before we even glance at a number, we need to talk about the name itself. Getting the local details right matters.
Oh, definitely.
So for everyone listening, please just say Stouffville.
Yes, that's crucial advice. Stouffville. Got it.
It's the accepted way, the easy way. And knowing that is sort of the first step to understanding this place.
It really is Stouffville. It's a town navigating, well, probably one of the most intense periods of growth pressure you'll find anywhere in the Greater Toronto area right now.
Couldn't agree more. Stouffville is. It's vibrant. It's changing fast. It's got this interesting mix, you know, that small town feel, but with modern challenges.
And it's beautifully located near the Oak Ridges Moraine.
Yeah, rolling landscapes, but then, boom, you're only about a 35-minute drive from downtown Toronto. That location, it drives everything we're about to discuss.
It really does. So our focus today isn't just going to be reading off budget lines.
No, definitely not.
We're cutting through all that to figure out what Stouffville's real strategic priorities are for 2026. We need to look hard at how they're trying to manage this massive population boom.
Where's the money coming from? That's key.
Absolutely. And maybe most importantly, what are the huge investments they're planning and the ones they desperately need over the next decade to actually handle all this growth?
It's like we're looking at a blueprint, isn't it? How a smaller town gears up to become a pretty significant urban center.
While juggling, you know, immediate economic issues and those provincial legislative changes that keep throwing curveballs.
Okay, let's dive in, starting with the bedrock context.
Yeah.
Governance and just this overwhelming growth.
Right. So the foundation for this entire budget, I mean, the thing driving almost every spending decision, every financial pressure we'll talk about, is demographics. Rapid change.
And not just a little bit of growth. This is transformational stuff dictated from higher up.
Right, exactly. It's driven by regional planning mandates.
So paint the picture for us. What does Stouffville look like right now, population-wise?
Okay, so the snapshot as of July 2025. The estimate is 57,484 residents. That's our starting point.
57,000. Okay.
But the town's planning has to look much further out based on provincial and regional targets. And those future numbers, well, they're pretty staggering.
Staggering is definitely the word. If you look ahead to 2051, the projection is around 103,500 residents.
Yeah. Think about that. Almost doubling the current population in about 25 years.
Wow.
That works out to an average annual growth rate of 2.4%, which sounds like a percentage, but what it means for a town.
It means everything has to scale up, right? Every single service.
Everything. Every pipe in the ground, every road lane, every fire truck, community centers, parks. It all needs to be planned, financed, built to handle another 52,100 people. The sheer capacity challenge is just immense.
And it's more than just infrastructure, isn't it? It fundamentally changes the character of the town.
Absolutely. And you see that reflected not just in the future plans, but in who lives there now. The diversity is striking.
Tell us about that mix.
Well, Stouffville has deep roots, established way back in 1803 by Mennonite settlers, people like Abraham Stoffer. Those historical connections are strong.
But the modern town?
It's incredibly dynamic. By the 2021 census, nearly 46% of residents identified with a visible minority group.
46%. That's significant.
Huge. We're talking large, active South Asian, Chinese, Black, and Filipino communities, among others. And that means municipal services, from how you run recreation programs to how you engage the public, they have to reflect and include that diversity. It's not optional.
Okay, so population almost doubles. Diversity is high and growing.
Yeah.
Logically, housing has to keep pace. And that reshapes the physical town completely.
It forces a massive rethink on housing. So 2025 figures show about 18,891 housing units.
Okay.
By 2051, that's projected to hit 34,730 units.
So nearly double the number of homes, an 84% increase.
Yeah, and this is where the strategic planning really kicks in. They can't just keep building sprawling, low-density subdivisions like in the past, can they?
No, the land use wouldn't work. The infrastructure costs, they wouldn't be sustainable.
Precisely. The big takeaway from their planning docs is this necessary shift in housing density. They have to move away from mostly low-density single-family homes towards more medium and high-density options.
More apartment buildings, townhouses.
Exactly. Mixed-use developments, concentrating growth near transit. That's the provincial push, too.
What does that shift mean, practically, for the town's budget and services?
It demands totally different kinds of support. Your focus shifts, right? It's less about just widening rural roads and more about investing heavily in sidewalks, local parks, better stormwater management for dense areas.
Vertical infrastructure, too, I guess. Like fire services need different equipment for high-rises.
Absolutely. High-rise firefighting capacity becomes critical, and you need robust public transit routes connecting these denser nodes. It forces a complete reevaluation of what assets they have now versus what they'll need.
Okay, so this backdrop is explosive growth, increasing diversity, a shift to density. That leads us straight into the political landscape, how these huge decisions actually get made. We have to mention the strong mayor powers in Stouffville.
Yeah, that's a really critical piece of context for this 2026 budget. Since November 2023, the Mayor Lovett, has been operating with enhanced powers.
Granted by the province.
Right, under Part 6.1 of the Municipal Act.
For listeners maybe not in Ontario or a strong mayor area, what does that actually change about how a budget gets passed?
It fundamentally shifts the power dynamic. Under these rules, the mayor gets more direct influence over the town's administrative structure, setting organizational goals. And crucially for the budget,
Yes.
the mayor is empowered, even obligated, to make sure the budget aligns with specific provincial priorities, especially housing targets.
So the mayor tables the budget. Council can suggest changes, they can vote. But if council wants changes that conflict with those provincial goals, the mayor can essentially override them.
That's the mechanism, yes. The mayor can veto amendments that don't align with provincial priorities, and a council needs a 2/3 majority to override that veto. It gives the mayor's office a stronger hand to push through specific priorities.
Things like certain staffing increases, maybe focusing on organizational changes, stuff that might otherwise get bogged down in council debate.
Potentially, yes. In Stouffville, the documents note Mayor Lovett emphasized collaboration with council. But ultimately, the authority for tabling the budget and directing administration rests more with the mayor now. It allows for a potentially more focused, top-down approach to implementing that growth strategy.
Sounds like it's designed for speed, really, when you have these urgent growth mandates.
That's the stated intent, certainly. To overcome potential municipal inertia when facing big, provincially driven demands like getting housing built quickly.
Okay, growth pressure, check. Political mechanism, check. But how does the town know what the people living there actually want? How did they gauge the public pulse for this 2026 budget?
This is actually an area where Stouffville seems to have done a really good job this time around.
How so?
Well, for the first time, they ran a really comprehensive public engagement campaign. It went way beyond just, one public meeting.
What did they do?
They used multiple channels. There was an online spending simulator, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah, those really make the trade-offs real for people. If you want X, you might have to cut Y.
Exactly. They also had a public feedback survey, and they did in-person engagement at community events, really trying to meet people where they are.
And did people respond? What was the uptake?
It was pretty strong. They got 629 survey responses.
That's decent for a municipal survey.
And maybe more revealing, over 1,000 unique answers to the open-ended questions. So people took the time to write out their thoughts.
That gives them a solid evidence-based foundation then. It's not just council guessing what people want.
Right. It helps ensure decisions are grounded in resident preferences, not just what seems easiest administratively.
Okay, let's get into those key survey findings. This is usually where you see that classic municipal tension. People are pretty happy, but don't ask them for more money.
Slight laugh. You basically nailed it. The feedback on value for taxes was quite positive, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah. A solid majority, 55.34%, rated the value they get for their property taxes as very good or good.
That's pretty high satisfaction.
It is. About a third said fair, and only around 12% rated it as poor. So generally, people feel they're getting decent services for their money.
But, the inevitable but, what about willingness to pay more, especially knowing that 3.5% increase is coming?
Yeah, that's where the resistance shows up, but maybe not universally. 36.12% were flat out unwilling to pay more in taxes.
Okay, over a third. That's a significant block council has to listen to.
Absolutely. But on the flip side, if they need to fund a growth and keep those satisfaction levels up, they need some people willing to chip in more.
Did they find that group?
They did. So 21.35% were open to modest increases, and another 16.85% supported mid-range increases.
So if you add those up, that's roughly another third, maybe a bit more, who are open to paying more, presumably, if they see the value.
Exactly. It's a fascinating split. About a third say, no way, but another significant chunk says, well, maybe if it's for the right things.
Which makes the priorities identified in that survey absolutely critical for selling that 3.5% tax hike. What did people say was most important?
The top priorities were really focused on the core stuff, which probably validates the budget direction council was already considering.
Like what?
Number one, overwhelmingly, was infrastructure investments. Roads, water systems, basic maintenance. That got 17.74% of the priority votes.
Makes sense in a growing town. What was next?
Number two was fire and emergency services at 13.1%. A clear signal about safety, especially as the town gets denser.
Okay, infrastructure, safety. What was third?
Third was interesting. Events and community engagement at 12.5%.
The quality of life stuff.
Yeah.
Maintaining that Stouffville feel even as it grows.
Precisely. People want the basics done right, fix the roads, have fast emergency response, but they also value that sense of community. It's a clear mandate.
That sets the stage perfectly for digging into the operating budget itself.
Yeah.
How do they deliver those services while juggling all these financial pressures? Okay, let's switch gears to the operating side. This is the money for the day-to-day, right? Salaries, keeping the lights on, fuel for the trucks, the daily grind, as you called it.
Exactly. This is what keeps the town running year to year.
So what was the specific tax increase proposed for 2026?
Mayor Lovett tabled a proposed 3.50% increase to the municipal tax levy back on November 5th, 2025.
3.5%. And the rationale?
It's specifically framed as needed to maintain the existing high service levels people seem to value, cover those unavoidable inflationary costs, and, importantly, fund some critical enhancements.
Like the firefighters.
Yes, specifically funding 4 new fire suppression positions, plus a couple of other positions we can get into that are actually offset, meaning they don't hit the tax levy.
Okay, but it's important to clarify, the number people actually see on their property tax bill isn't just the town's 3.5%, is it?
No, that's a crucial point. The 3.5% is just the Stouffville portion. Your tax bill also includes charges for the region of York and for education, which the town collects but doesn't control.
So what's the estimated blended increase for a typical resident?
The estimate included in the budget documents is a 3.04% blended increase. Slightly lower because the regional and education parts might be changing at different rates.
Got it. 3.04% overall impact. Now, you mentioned earlier, Stouffville has historically been quite affordable tax-wise compared to its neighbors.
Yeah, that's a really significant part of their identity and appeal. In 2025, they had the 6th lowest residential tax rate in the entire Greater Toronto-Hamilton area of the GTHA.
6th lowest in the GTHA. That's surprisingly low for a place under such growth pressure.
It really is. It makes the town very attractive financially, compared to some very high-cost neighbors in York Region and the GTA.
It really is.
Yeah.
Keeping taxes that low when you're facing this kind of growth, and we know there are hundreds of millions in future projects needed.
That's the core challenge, isn't it? The structural paradox for Stouffville Council.
How
Well, keeping that low tax rate signals they're fiscally responsible. It attracts residents, builds the tax base, but it also means less money going into reserves each year. And those reserves are exactly what they need to bridge that massive capital funding gap we'll talk about later, that $226 million unfunded list.
So the 3.5% increase is trying to thread a needle.
Exactly. It's trying to enhance safety now with the firefighters, cover costs, but without causing major sticker shock for taxpayers. But it forces the town to be incredibly efficient and really rely heavily on its other revenue streams.
Okay, let's do that deep dive then. Where does the money come from? The total revenue for 2026 is budgeted at about $82.69 million. Where does it originate?
No surprise, the biggest chunk by far is property taxation. That's the engine. It's
Wait.
budgeted at $53.1 million. That makes up 64.2%, almost two-thirds of all the revenue coming in for 2026.
And that's based on property values assessed by MPAC, the provincial agency, but the town sets the rate for its share.
Correct. That $53.1 million is the result of the assessed values multiplied by the municipal tax rate they set, incorporating that 3.5% increase.
Okay, if property tax is number one, what's the second biggest source?
That would be user fees.
Ah, paying directly for services.
Right. This category is projected to bring in $13.48 million. This is money from things like swimming lessons at the leisure center, programs at the museum, activities for seniors, ice rentals, things like that.
Revenue generated because people are actively using those town services.
Exactly.
Now, user fees usually go up each year to cover rising costs. How does Stouffville figure out those increases? Do they just use the standard inflation rate, the CPI?
No, and this is where it gets a bit technical but important. They use something called a customized municipal price index, or MPI.
MPI. Okay, different from the CPI, Consumer Price Index. How?
Well, the CPI tracks a broad basket of goods consumers buy: groceries, gas, clothing. The MPI is tailored specifically to the costs municipalities face.
What kind of costs are different?
Think about what a town buys. Huge amounts of asphalt and concrete for roads, fuel for snowplows and fire trucks, electricity for streetlights, specific union wage agreements, and a really big one lately: those soaring costs for employee health benefits we'll touch on.
So the MPI reflects the inflation on those specific municipal inputs.
Precisely. And for 2026 and 2027, Stouffville's MPI is projected at 2.5%. So user fees are generally adjusted by that 2.5% factor.
The goal being to keep those programs as close to self-funding as possible without needing more property tax subsidy.
That's the idea. Keep the tax levy focused on core services, make programs pay for themselves where feasible.
Okay, so taxes are king, user fees are number two. What else fills out the revenue picture? Any other significant chunks?
There are a few other key pieces. Grants from other levels of government, federal or provincial, are budgeted at $1.02 million. These are often tied to specific projects.
Yep.
Investment income is actually pretty significant, projected at $3.39 million. That comes from the town managing its cash reserves prudently.
Good cash management pays off.
It does. And finally, rental income. They have 9 facilities they rent out: arenas, community halls, the museum space. That brings in about $2.49 million.
Okay, so a diversified mix, but heavily reliant on property tax. Now, on the spending side, you mentioned headwinds. Inflation is supposed to be moderating, but the budget flags specific cost pressures.
That's right. While they're budgeting for general cost increases around 2% annually, sort of in line with broader inflation targets, there's one area that's just exploding.
Which is?
Group health benefits for employees. The projections are genuinely concerning.
Not bad.
For 2026, they're projecting a 7.42% increase in those costs, and it gets worse. For 2027, the projection jumps to a massive 10.27% increase.
Wow, 10% increase in benefits costs. That's way, way higher than the 3.5% tax levy increase or the 2.5% MPI for user fees.
Exactly. It puts enormous strain on the operating budget. Staffing is always the biggest piece of the operating pie for any municipality. When one part of your compensation cost benefits inflates at double-digit rates.
It forces tough choices elsewhere. Cuts or finding big savings just to tread water.
Precisely. It eats up any fiscal room very quickly.
But the biggest structural challenge mentioned isn't just inflation, it's this thing you call the development charge dilemma.
This sounds fundamental. Let's unpack this. It stems from provincial law changes.
Yes, Bills 23 and 17, and this is probably the single biggest long-term financial risk factor highlighted in the Stouffville budget documents. It fundamentally destabilizes how growth is supposed to pay for itself.
Okay, explain development charges, or DCs, first. What are they supposed to do?
So DCs are fees that developers pay when they build new houses or buildings. By law, that money is specifically meant to fund the growth-related infrastructure needed to service those new developments.
Like new roads, new water mains, new parks, new fire stations that wouldn't be needed if not for the new development.
Exactly. Growth pays for growth. That's the principle.
So what did Bills 23 and 17 do to mess that up? They threw a major wrench in the works, particularly regarding the timing of payments. Historically, municipalities often collected DCs earlier in the process, giving them cash flow to plan and start building the infrastructure before people moved in.
Which makes sense. You need the pipes ready before the taps turn on.
Right. But the new legislation introduced freezes, discounts on some charges, but critically, it allows developers to defer paying DCs.
Defer until when?
Often until the construction is finished and the homes or buildings are actually occupied.
So the town might not see that DC money for years after the development starts.
Exactly. It can be 18 months, 24 months, even 36 months or longer between when the town needs to commit funds for engineering and starting construction on, say, a new sewer line, and when the DC revenue meant to pay for it actually arrives.
That sounds like a massive cash flow problem for the town.
Yeah.
They have to accommodate the growth now, start building now, but the money comes much later.
It's a huge cash flow crunch. It forces the municipality to essentially front the money for the developers.
Using what? Their own
Right.
savings.
Using their reserves, those rainy day funds or other temporary internal borrowing, they have to bet that the DC revenue will eventually show up as promised down the line.
So the public purse is essentially covering the developer's financing costs for that period, carrying the risk.
That's a fair way to put it. The budget documents strongly signal this implication. This financial lag puts immense pressure on the town's reserves, which are already needed for maintaining existing infrastructure.
And we see the impact of that pressure directly in one specific line item in the budget, the transfer to reserves.
Yes, that's a key indicator. The amount of money the town is putting into its reserve funds is going down significantly in 2026.
How much?
It's budgeted at $12.85 million for 2026, compared to $16.45 million they transferred in 2025. That's a drop of nearly $4 million.
Now, the budget docs say part of that drop is a specific council choice.
Yeah.
They decided to defer the capital levy.
Yes, that's an important nuance for the 2026 decrease. The capital levy is a specific portion of property tax dedicated solely to funding infrastructure repair and replacement. Council chose to pause that levy for 2026.
Why?
To lessen the overall property tax impact on residents this year, to keep that blended rate closer to 3%.
But wait, deferring the capital levy, the dedicated money for fixing existing stuff, isn't that a really risky move? It makes the tax bill look better now, but doesn't it directly make that infrastructure maintenance gap, the $3.9 million annual shortfall, will get to even worse?
You've hit the critical political trade-off right there. Yes, it
Yeah.
absolutely does.
So they're prioritizing short-term affordability over the long-term health of their roads and pipes.
That's exactly the choice they made for 2026. It keeps the tax increase lower, which responds to that 36% of residents who said they were unwilling to pay more. But financially, it digs the hole deeper for asset renewal. It exacerbates the long-term problem created by the DC delays.
Wow. That really frames the central tension here, doesn't it? Short-term relief versus long-term sustainability.
It's the classic municipal balancing act, made even harder by these external pressures. They're trying to manage explosive growth, but with cash flow constraints imposed by provincial legislation and political pressure to keep taxes low.
Okay, so we understand the revenue side, the pressures, the trade-offs.
Yeah.
Let's pivot now to where the money is actually spent. You mentioned Stouffville uses a different structure, service themes.
Yes, they've moved away from just listing traditional departments like Public Works or Parks and Rec. Instead, they grouped their 41 distinct services into 7 thematic categories or pillars.
What's the point of that?
Transparency, really. It's meant to be more accessible for the public. Instead of jargon, it focuses on the outcome. What are taxpayers actually getting for their money?
Makes sense. What are the 7 pillars?
They are a town that grows, a town that moves, a healthy and greener town, an engaging town, a safe town, good governance, and finally, organizational effectiveness.
And looking at how much money goes to each pillar gives you a quick snapshot of council's priorities. Right?
Exactly. Where the dollars flow tells the story.
And the story here seems to be internal capability. The single biggest slice of the pie, almost 40% of the entire operating budget, goes to organizational effectiveness. That sounds like a lot for admin and back office stuff. Why so high?
It does seem high initially, but organizational effectiveness is really the core engine that keeps the whole municipality running. It covers the essential support services.
Like what specifically?
IT services, financial management, human resources, communications, customer service. Basically, everything needed to support the frontline services and ensure the town operates efficiently and, importantly, manages risk.
Okay, and the price tag for that is?
A huge $31.4 million. That's 38% of the total 2026 operating budget.
What's driving that number? Is it just salaries?
Salaries are a big part, of course, but the focus here isn't just keeping the lights on. The budget emphasizes continuous improvement and dealing with major systemic risks. For instance, IT services alone has a net budget of $3.97 million.
That signals IT is a major priority. Cybersecurity, data management.
All of the above. Especially critical for a rapidly growing organization handling more complex data and facing increasing cyber threats. Reliability and security are non-negotiable.
And there's one massive, time-sensitive IT project looming, isn't there? The ERP replacement.
Yes, the Enterprise Resource Planning System. This is huge. It's not just an upgrade, it's an existential necessity.
Why existential?
Because the town's current core software for finance, HR, everything Microsoft Dynamics GP reaches its official end of life in 2029. Support stops, updates stop.
Meaning if they don't replace it by then.
It risks catastrophic failure. It could paralyze basic functions like paying staff, collecting taxes, managing assets. Missing that 2029 deadline is simply not an option.
So the clock is ticking loudly. And the 2026 budget is really the starting gun for this massive migration project.
Absolutely. A key strategic investment baked into that $31.4 million organizational effectiveness budget is hiring an external ERP consultant.
To guide the process.
Yes. They need expert help to define the requirements, manage the complex procurement process for a new system, and then oversee what will be a multi-year implementation project. It's incredibly complex, moving decades of financial data, changing workflows.
So that high-budget figure reflects the need to resource this massive high-stakes tech project properly, starting now.
Exactly. It's a prudent investment to mitigate a major future risk.
Does this pillar also see staffing increases? You mentioned 2 offset positions earlier.
Yes, within the Financial and Infrastructure Management Service under this theme, the full-time equivalent staff count goes from 23.0 in 2025 to 25.0 in 2026.
Adding 2 people.
Right. But the key point the budget makes is that these 2 new positions, an accounts payable clerk and a finance analyst, are fully offset.
Meaning their cost is covered by savings found elsewhere or new revenue, so they don't add to that 3.5% tax increase.
Correct. They're considered vital hires to improve efficiency and oversight without impacting the levy. The AP clerk helps ensure vendors get paid smoothly, which is important, and the finance analyst boosts their capacity for the kind of sophisticated financial planning needed to navigate the DC issues and the huge capital plan.
Okay, so organizational effectiveness is about building capacity and managing risk. Let's move to the second biggest theme, and one the public clearly prioritized: a safe town.
Right. A safe town comes in at $13.2 million, or 16% of the total budget. This covers fire and emergency services, municipal law enforcement, animal services, even crossing guards. It's all about protecting people and property.
And the headline investment here is clearly the new firefighters, directly linked to meeting national standards.
Yes, the budget funds 4 new fire suppression positions. This is explicitly tied to meeting the service levels laid out in their fire master plan and moving the town closer to meeting NFPA 1710 and 1720 standards.
NFPA. Remind us what those are in plain English. What do they mean for a resident?
NFPA is the National Fire Protection Association. They set the benchmarks across North America. NFPA 1710 deals with career fire departments, setting standards for things like how many firefighters should be on the first truck arriving at a scene and how quickly that truck should arrive, often targeting things like 8 minutes or less.
And 1720.
That applies similar principles to volunteer or composite, mix of career and volunteer departments. So by funding these 4 new positions, Stouffville is tangibly improving its ability to meet those crucial response time and staffing benchmarks. faster, safer, more effective response. It directly answers that community demand for safety.
And this staffing boost isn't just for today, it's needed for the future infrastructure too, right?
Absolutely. It's strategically timed. They need this enhanced staffing to properly operate the planned replacement Fire Station 5-2, which is essential for covering the growing parts of town, especially denser areas.
Also under Safe Town, you noted a big jump in animal services staffing.
Yeah, that's quite dramatic. It went from just 1.250 Es in 2024 up to 3.250 Es projected for 2025 and continuing in 2026.
Tripling the staff. Why?
It likely reflects the growing pains of urbanization. More people, more pets, more interactions with wildlife in developing areas mean increased need for animal control by law enforcement related to animals and managing public safety issues.
Makes sense. Okay, next pillar. A healthy and greener town. $10.3 million, 12% of the budget. This covers waste, parks, recreation, the active living stuff.
Right. And the finances here show an interesting push and pull. On one hand, they face rising costs for garbage collection contracts, standard inflation pressure.
But there's an offset.
Yes, a significant saving comes from the province taking over the Blue Box recycling program costs. Responsibility is shifting to the producers of packaging, which takes a big chunk of cost off the municipal tax bill.
That's a nice win for the town's budget.
Definitely helps balance things out in this area.
And the demand for services under this healthy banner seems huge based on the performance stats.
Absolutely. The numbers show people are heavily using the facilities. Over 5,483 participants in swimming lessons in 2024 alone. They're targeting 5,200 again for 2026. And group fitness participation is projected to hit 41,000 participant visits. These aren't small numbers. They underscore why recreation is important here and why that future leisure center we'll discuss is deemed so necessary.
What about the greener part? Any specific goals there?
Yes. A key environmental goal is increasing the tree canopy. They have a target to plant 250 new trees in 2026. It contributes to ecological health, air quality, and just the general pleasantness of the town.
Okay, on to the pillar that enables all this activity. A town that moves. Infrastructure. $6.9 million, 8% of operating spend.
This is the core transportation function.
Right.
Roads, sidewalks, streetlights. The mission is pretty straightforward. Keep the road network in good shape and functioning efficiently.
And the biggest cost here is just basic road upkeep.
Yes, roads maintenance is the largest single net expense within the scheme at $3.91 million. Pothole filling, patching, minor repairs.
How do they measure if they're doing a good job?
Their key performance metric is tracking the lane kilometers of road rated as good or very good. The target is to keep 350 kilometers in that top condition category.
Which requires consistent, ongoing investment.
Relentless investment, pavement preservation, crack sealing, resurfacing. It all has to happen on schedule. This also covers sidewalk maintenance, street lighting, traffic management, all crucial for accessibility and safety.
And falling behind on this maintenance is where that infrastructure gap really bites, right?
Exactly. If you defer maintenance under a town that moves, the problems get exponentially worse and more expensive to fix later. That $3.9 million annual gap we keep mentioning, a lot of it relates to the assets covered in this pillar.
Got it. Next up, an engaging town. Culture, community connection. $6.7 million, another 8%.
This is the heart and soul stuff, arguably. It funds events and community engagement. Think festivals, Canada Day.
Yeah.
It also supports the library, which is a major piece at $2.72 million net cost and 13 full-time staff.
Plus the museum, the art gallery.
Right, the Latcham Art Center and theater programming. It's the investment in maintaining that community character residents said they valued.
The library seems to be at a crossroads, though. Big anniversary coming up, but also facing growth pressure.
It really is. They're planning their 150th anniversary celebration for 2027, a huge milestone reflecting deep community roots.
But the building itself is struggling.
The current building on Park Drive was designed for a smaller population. It's already seen a 20% population increase since then. So they're doing a comprehensive library space study right now.
To figure out what they need long term.
Exactly. To assess how the current space can be optimized, but more importantly, to provide the data needed to justify and plan for that major new library branch that's on the unfunded capital list. The demand is outstripping the current facility.
Okay, last pillar. Good governance.
Good governance wraps things up at $5.4 million, or 6% of the budget. This covers the essential overhead, corporate leadership, the CAO's office, council support, legal services, risk management.
The machinery of government itself.
Pretty much. The most notable single item here is a one-time cost in 2026. $400,000 budgeted for election management.
Ah, right. 2026 is a municipal election year. Can't avoid that cost.
Nope. Part of the democratic process.
So, summing up the operating side, sounds like they're strategically investing in internal capacity, like that ERP system and finance staff,
Yeah.
and boosting safety firefighters while trying to maintain recreation and roads.
Yeah.
And they're funding it through that carefully balanced 3.5% levy increase, trying to manage taxpayer sensitivity while meeting growth needs.
That's a good summary. It's a budget trying to do a lot under significant constraints. Okay, if the operating budget was the daily grind, the capital plan,
Yeah.
this is where we see the big construction projects, the long-term vision for Stouffville's physical foundation.
And this is where the scale of the financial challenge really comes into focus, right?
Absolutely. This section lays bare the long-term fiscal stress.
So for the immediate year, 2026, how much funded capital work is planned? Money they actually have allocated.
In 2026, the town plans to invest $31.9 million in capital projects where funding is secured.
$31.9 million. How's that split up? Where's the money going?
It's heavily skewed towards one massive project this year. Over half, 51%, is dedicated just to the Main Street reconstruction.
Wow, okay. What about the rest?
About 24% goes to asset management, basically, fixing or replacing existing stuff. Another 10% is for general growth-related projects, and a small 3% for strategic initiatives.
And given that Main Street dominance, I assume most of this spending falls under the A Town That Moves theme.
You got it. $21.4 million of that $31.9 million total capital spend is categorized under A Town That Moves, mostly because of that flagship Main Street job.
Let's talk about that Main Street reconstruction. $18.5 million just in 2026. That's a huge undertaking for one street.
It is enormous. This is phase 2 of a really critical 3-phase project. This chunk runs right through the core downtown area, from Park Drive to Edward Street.
And it's more than just new asphalt, I assume.
Oh, way more. This is deep reconstruction. They're replacing and upgrading all the essential underground infrastructure. The water mains, the wastewater sewers, the stormwater pipes. That's vital to increase capacity for the future, especially if they want more density downtown.
Plus the visible stuff.
Plus the streetscape upgrades, yes. Better sidewalks, lighting, maybe plantings, aiming for a more pedestrian-friendly and attractive downtown. It's a key revitalization project.
It really highlights how even maintaining old infrastructure in a growing town requires massive capital spending just to bring it up to modern standards.
Absolutely. Often the most expensive and critical work is buried underground, unseen until it fails or needs upgrading for growth.
Okay, so Main Street eats half the budget. The next biggest chunk, about a quarter, is for asset management fixing existing assets. This is driven by that provincial law, right?
Yes. The Infrastructure for Jobs and Prosperity Act from 2015, it mandates that municipalities have a solid understanding of the condition of all their assets, roads, bridges, buildings, pipes, and have a plan to maintain them responsibly.
And Stouffville has a recent plan.
They completed their latest asset management plan, the AMP, in 2025. And that AMP gives us the hard numbers, the unvarnished truth about their infrastructure health and funding needs.
Okay, lay it on us. What did the 2025 AMP reveal? What's the real need?
It identified a very clear, calculated annual infrastructure investment gap of $8.3 million.
$8.3 million per year.
Per year. That's the amount the AMP calculates they should be spending every single year over and above what they were spending, just to keep their existing assets in a state of good repair and prevent them from failing prematurely.
Just to tread water, basically. Stop things from getting worse.
Essentially, yes, to maintain current service levels from existing infrastructure over the long run.
Okay, so the need is $8.3 million extra per year. Now, how much money do they actually have available in the 2026 budget specifically for this asset renewal works?
Right.
Especially since they deferred that capital levy.
Right. For 2026, the budget shows $12.5 million available for rehabilitation and replacement projects.
Where does that $12.5 million come from, if not the capital levy?
It's primarily drawn from existing reserve funds, about $7.4 million, and supplemented by expected federal and provincial grants, like the Canada Community Building Fund, totaling $5.1 million.
Okay, $12.5 million available. But didn't you say the AMP recommended
Yeah.
more?
Yes. The AMP recommended spending $16.4 million annually on asset renewal to close that gap over time.
So they need $16.4 million according to their own plan, but they only have $12.5 million available in 2026.
Correct. Which means even after allocating that $12.5 million, there's still a $3.9 million shortfall in 2026 compared to the AMP recommendation.
So the gap persists. They're still falling behind by nearly $4 million this year alone.
Exactly. And this is where deferring that capital levy really bites. That $3.9 million gap means Stouffville's infrastructure deficit is actually growing in 2026, not shrinking. They're underfunding maintenance, increasing the risk of bigger problems and higher costs down the road.
That seems incredibly risky long-term. That structural gap, where you know you need to spend more on basic upkeep, but you choose not to for short-term tax relief, that feels unsustainable.
It is, by definition, fiscally unsustainable over the long haul. It's the classic trade-off: long-term asset health versus short-term taxpayer affordability. They're being transparent about the gap in the AMP, but the budget decision for 2026 prioritizes keeping the tax rate lower today.
Which means future councils, future taxpayers inherit infrastructure that's in worse shape and costs more to fix.
That's the reality of compounding infrastructure debt.
Okay, if cash flow's tight, reserves are being drawn down, the capital levy is deferred. What about borrowing, taking on debt? Is that part of their strategy to fill these gaps?
Stouffville actually has a very cautious approach to debt. They operate well within the borrowing limits set by the province.
How do those limits work?
The province calculates an annual repayment limit, or ARL, for each municipality. It's basically a ceiling on how much debt servicing costs, principal and interest payments they can handle based on their own revenues.
So it's a legal maximum borrowing capacity.
Right, but Stouffville's own internal policy is much stricter. They limit their annual debt payments to just 12.5% of that provincial ARL.
Only 1/8 of what they're legally allowed? That's very conservative.
Extremely prudent. And their actual debt servicing ratio in 2025 was even lower than that 12.5% policy limit. So, reflecting that caution, the 2026 budget proposes no new debt issuances.
They're relying solely on reserves and grants for capital this year.
Correct. A strong aversion to taking on new debt obligations right now.
That prudence is commendable in one way, but it sharpens the core question, doesn't it? If you keep taxes low, defer the capital levy, and refuse to borrow, where on earth does the money for all the new infrastructure needed for growth actually come from?
Exactly. And that brings us squarely to the long-term forecast and this truly eye-watering figure for Stouffville's unfunded ambition.
Okay, let's look at the crystal ball, the 10-year capital plan. What's the total price tag for projects identified between 2026 and 2035?
The plan identifies a total of $391.2 million worth of projects needed over the next decade, for both maintaining existing assets and building new ones for growth.
Nearly $400 million over 10 years. But the key word is identified, not funded.
Precisely. A very large portion of that $391 million currently lacks confirmed funding.
The budget breaks these down into two types of not quite funded projects: front-ended and truly unfunded. Can you clarify that distinction? It relates back to the DC problem, right?
Yes. Front-ended projects are a direct consequence of the DC cash flow dilemma. These are projects that should be fully funded by development charges eventually. But because the DC money comes late, the town doesn't have enough cash in its reserves now to pay for them up front.
So how do they get built?
The mechanism often requires the developer to build the infrastructure for, say, a required sewer extension or a new local road needed for their subdivision. The town then promises to repay the developer for that work later out of the future DC revenues collected from that development.
So the developer is essentially loaning the town the money, or rather the infrastructure itself, up front.
That's a good way to think of it. The Stouffville Road sewer upgrade, listed at $3.078 million in 2026 as developer front-ended, is exactly that. The town needs it built, doesn't have the DC cash yet, so the developer builds it, and the town owes them back later.
Relying heavily on that DC money eventually materializing as planned.
Yes, it carries risk if development slows or DC revenues fall short. But the truly alarming category is the unfunded projects.
Okay, this sounds like the big one. What's the total value of projects in the 10-year plan that are simply unfunded? No identified source at all.
The total for these genuinely unfunded projects comes to $226.6 million.
$226.6 million over 10 years.
Yes, that's the estimated cost of infrastructure and facilities needed to support the mandated growth to 103,500 people, for which the town currently has no identified viable funding path. No grant secured, no debt planned, reserves insufficient.
That figure, it just hangs there, doesn't it? a $250 million question mark over the town's future. What specific critical things are included in that $226.6 million? Are these just nice-to-haves?
Absolutely not. These are fundamental assets required for a community of that future size. We're talking core public safety, essential community services.
Give us the highlights.
Okay, first, public safety. $43.6 million is needed for 3 future fire stations. They're planned for the growing areas of Lincolnville, Gormley, and Ringwood.
If those don't get built as the town expands.
Response times will inevitably lengthen, falling short of those NFPA standards we talked about. It creates a significant public safety risk in those new, denser neighborhoods.
Okay, what else?
Education and culture. A new, modern library branch that's pegged at $38.2 million. We already discussed how the current facility is strained. A town of 100,000 needs more library capacity.
Makes sense. And the biggest ticket item.
Recreation and community hubs. The single largest unfunded project is a major new leisure center planned for the Highway 48 corridor. The estimated cost, $139.5 million.
Whoa, $140 million for one rec center.
It reflects the scale needed to meet that massive demonstrated demand for programs like swimming, fitness, community spaces that we saw in the operating budget stats. It's envisioned as a core piece of building a complete community in that growing area.
So fire stations, a library, a massive leisure center. These aren't frills. They're the basic building blocks of a functional, safe, engaging large town or small city.
Exactly. And right now, they represent $226.6 million in needs, with no clear path to funding within the current 10-year financial outlook.
This list just starkly illustrates the incredible pressure that provincially mandated rapid growth puts on municipal finances, doesn't it? The growth targets are set, the service demands are clear, but the funding mechanisms, especially with the DC changes, just haven't kept pace.
That's the crux of it. The budget is incredibly transparent about identifying the costs of growth and maintaining assets. It lays out the $8.3 million annual maintenance need, the $226 million unfunded list, but it cannot, on its own, solve the structural funding shortfall created by delayed DC revenues and the political choice to defer the capital levy. The fiscal reckoning is pushed further down the road. #outro.
Well, this has been a truly fascinating, if somewhat sobering, deep dive into Stouffville's 2026 budget. The whole story seems defined by this constant underlying tension.
It really is. On one side, you have this undeniable mandated rapid population growth aiming for 103,500 people by 2051. Just massive expansion.
And on the other side, you have these very real, significant fiscal pressures. The development charge delays creating cash flow crises, that ERP system needing urgent replacement, the persistent $3.9 million annual gap in basic infrastructure maintenance.
And looming over it all, that $226 million in unfunded future needs. Yet within those constraints, the budget does show a clear commitment to maintaining service excellence today.
Right, like funding those 4 new firefighters, a direct response to community priorities and safety standards.
And making those crucial investments in organizational modernization, the ERP planning, the IT security upgrades guided by those strong mayor powers, potentially allowing for quicker strategic shifts.
So despite the headwinds, that 3.5% tax levy increase is acting like their financial compass for the year, isn't it? It's clearly prioritizing safety, internal efficiency, and tackling core infrastructure work like that huge $18.5 million Main Street reconstruction.
Exactly. They're trying to navigate carefully, balancing the immediate needs and the political sensitivity to taxes against those enormous long-term capital requirements.
And you have to credit the budget's transparency. It doesn't hide the challenges. It clearly lists those essential future assets, the fire stations, the library, that huge $139 million leisure center, even though they add up to $226.6 million in unfunded projects. They've put the true cost of building tomorrow's Stouffville right there on paper.
They have laid it bare. Which leads us directly to that final provocative thought for you, our listeners, to chew on after hearing all this.
Okay, let's hear it.
The Stouffville 2026 budget makes a very deliberate political choice. It defers the capital levy, the dedicated infrastructure funding specifically to ease the short-term property tax burden on current residents. It prioritizes affordability today.
Right.
But in the very same document, it acknowledges that nearly $4 million annual infrastructure maintenance gap is not being closed, and it identifies over $226 million in massive long-term investments needed for the 52,000 new residents expected in the coming decades.
So here's a question for you. How should a rapidly growing town like Stouffville or any town in a similar situation effectively and, maybe more importantly, ethically balance that desire for short-term affordability for the people living there now with the undeniable, massive, non-negotiable capital investments required to build a functional, safe, and engaging community for the residents who are inevitably arriving tomorrow?
It's the ultimate municipal dilemma, isn't it? A balancing act with huge consequences for everyone, current residents and future ones alike. Something to think about.